all our discussions on health, have we missed a big part, a big piece in the jigsaw? Could our exposure to light potentially be more important than the food that we eat?
Our biology is kind of set up to work with this 24-hour cycle of light and darkness. And if you mess with that, things start to happen to, first of all, to these circadian rhythms, so these 24-hour fluctuations in our biology. So if you're exposed to light at night, one thing that does is it pushes your circadian rhythms later. That's not necessarily a bad thing unless you have to wake up to go to work or school the next morning. And if you're kind of seeing light late at night and your circadian rhythms are being pushed later, that means the time when you feel sleepy and want to go to sleep is pushed later. So you potentially get less sleep. And if you get less sleep, that's going to have an impact on your alertness, on your mental functioning, on your mood. But it's more than that, because bright light is also a kind of brain stimulant. It boosts your alertness. So if you see light late at night, you're going to feel more awake. But also, if you don't see light in the daytime, you're going to feel more sluggish and less alert. And there are increasingly studies showing that bright light actually, it literally wakes us up. So, we now spend 90% of our daytimes indoors, where the light levels are like an order of magnitude lower than they are outdoors. Today is kind of grey and rainy and gloomy. Luminance or brightness is measured in this unit called lux. And on a day like today, it's about 5,000 lux outside. On a bright, sunny day in the middle of summer, it could be as high as 100,000 lux outside. But indoors, in the kind of standard office, it might be 200 to 300 lux. So it's hugely dimmer inside than it is outside.
So even on a cloudy day,
we
have evolved to actually have at least 10,000 lux of light exposure to our, through our eyes into our body. With all your knowledge, with your research, with your own experience, what has managed to stick in you and your family's lifestyle from over 2 years ago?
Yeah, dimming the lights in the evening. So my idea was, what would happen if we go cold turkey on artificial light after dark? That was my original thing. I was just interested in what happens if we get rid of all this artificial light. And so I went and saw these sleep researchers at the University of Surrey and said, I'd like to do this experiment. Will you help me? And they said, yes. But what we'd like you to always also think about is to try and boost your daylight exposure, which is how I first came across all this research, or emerging research about the importance of daylight. So the idea was that from 6 p.m. onwards, there would be no electric light and we would use candles instead. And then in the daytime, I would try, even though it was the middle of winter, and even though I'm bound to a desk in my work, I would do everything I could to get as much bright light exposure as possible. So that was things like when I made my breakfast in the morning, just going outside with my cup of tea and just, standing in the garden and eating my cup of tea and my bit of toast. And also swapping kind of indoor exercise. I did quite a lot of exercise, but swapping going to the gym in like a windowless exercise studio for doing the same kind of exercise outdoors. By the end of living like this, we did this on off for 6 weeks in the middle of December. It was beginning of December until mid-January. And by the end of it, it was my 6-year-old daughter who was the one who was saying, I really like it. It's really cozy and nice in the evenings.
What was the impact of doing this?
I was definitely sleepier earlier in the evenings. I wanted to go to bed like at sort of 9, 10 o'clock rather than 11 or 12 o'clock. I didn't always do that because of social obligations, but I wanted to. We also, once a week, we took readings of my melatonin. Now, melatonin is a hormone that you release. It's under the control of the circadian clock, and you release it in the evening at night. And it's basically a kind of biological signal to your whole body that it's time to shift change into night mode. And one thing it does is it impacts on the sleep centers. So it does tend to, you release melatonin and your brain kind of goes, nighttime, it's time to feel sleepy. Here's some sleep signals. And what we found was that I started secreting melatonin between 1.5 and 2 hours earlier than when I lived normally. So that explains why I was feeling sleepier earlier, because my body was saying, it's nighttime.
But this is
2 hours earlier.
I mean, for people listening, I just want to emphasize how You know how striking a point you just made. We're talking about a very important hormone in our body. Yes, it's associated with sleep. There are other studies suggesting it's an antioxidant, that it may have some anti-cancer properties potentially. And, we can maybe explore that later in our conversation, but this is an important hormone that is under this circadian clock that simply by switching off artificial light in the evening, you are shifting maybe 2 hours beforehand. You're changing an important hormone's secretion by 2 hours.
Yes.
That is significant. If a drug was doing that, we'd be talking about it. There would be a list of side effects on it. Yet many of us are doing that every evening on our devices without the awareness of the implications. So what are some of your top tips that you think are practical for most people?
Dim your evenings and brighten your days. That doesn't, as I said, it doesn't mean that you have to completely abolish artificial light at night. But you can do simple things like turn off the overhead ceiling lights, switch to kind of dimmer table lamps, those kind of things. Make sure that if you're using screens, that you try and put them on night mode. I think there are little things you can do to just boost your light exposure, like walk to work, cycle to work, go for a walk around the block. It doesn't have to take huge amount of time. But you're also getting some exercise. You're also getting up from your desk. You're often just breaking, just having a little bit of time to reflect. When you start doing it, you'll realize you feel better when you live like that.
Press subscribe to get more inspiration and ideas on how to feel better so you can get more out of life. And if you have a moment, why not check out this conversation that I've picked out as a perfect follow-up. Remember, lifestyle change is always worth it, because when you feel better, you live more.